D-Wave really knows how to run a conference, whether it's the clam bake and Boston Celtics in one night, or it's the variety of speakers that we saw over day one. I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you a little bit about trends that I see. And I'm not going to suggest to you at all that these are universal trends. These are trends that I see in my business with the Quantum Strategy Institute and so on. So let me give you a, let's try going backwards. A little bit of a profile of myself. So maybe I don't have the most traditional background when it comes to working in the quantum community. So I'm a 25-year banker. But when I retired from banking a number of years ago, I had the opportunity to think about what I wanted to do next. And at that point, AI was really making gains. And so I went to MIT, I did their AI strategy program, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and the phone started to ring. So people started to talk to me about, hey, can you help me build an AI roadmap for my company? Today, AI is everywhere, and we'll talk a little bit about it in my presentation. But then what I started to see was all these conference invitations. But when I went to the conferences, it was mostly academics and it was mostly vendors. There were very, very few consumers who were at these conferences. And so what I wanted to do was see how the adoption rate of quantum technologies was occurring. And when I saw that there was fairly slow, I wanted to help do something about it. So that was the genesis of the Quantum Strategy Institute, where we thought about, as a global think tank made up of about 20 management team members from the World Bank, from NVIDIA, from Google, and we're looking at ways of how we can accelerate the adoption of quantum technologies around the world. It's a philanthropic organization. We have volunteers. So when I work at the local level, where I do consulting for these roadmaps, I work at the national level on Canada's commercial strategy, and I work at the international level with QSI. So I notice trends for, generally speaking, the consumer side of quantum. And if any of what I say today is helpful, I'm thrilled, I've done my mission. I want to make sure that you have access to this information as well. What are we going to talk about in the next just under 30 minutes? I'm going to talk about roadmap priorities. And by the way, these are not vendor roadmap priorities. These are consumer roadmap priorities. We're going to talk about the value of consortiums and what does it mean to the consumer side. These are organizations who are making decisions about quantum. We're going to talk about government's role. And you certainly have seen governments step up in a big way in terms of national strategies and funding programs. We've talked about metrics and metrics definitions so far, but I'm going to suggest to you that there are some others that are very important to those making those investment decisions. And then this question of client pull versus tech push. Where are we in 2024? It's a bit wordy, but I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. What's powering organizational decisions? These consumers, these organizational technology consumers, they're wondering about the value of quantum systems and solutions. Quite often I talk to a CTO and he says, look, my IT budget is spent. But my conversation is not just about this year. In an environment of scarce investment and people resources, they're going to have to make hard decisions. Those trends that represent both challenges and opportunities, what does it mean to those decision makers? Well, the most important is this last phrase. In today's world, to remain competitive, companies realize exploiting AI capabilities is a must, yet act as if quantum is merely an exploration. Quantum needs to become a priority. So let me give you some examples. When I'm working with scale-up and corporate companies, and we're working on AI roadmaps or quantum roadmaps, Here are the things that are the most important to them when we're talking about those technologies. No surprise on the AI side, when we're talking about scale-up companies. So let's say they've had their first round of seed funding, and they're looking to take the next step. So generative AI, we heard about it a lot. Generative AI for a lot of these companies is the great democratizer. It's allowing them to compete in ways they never had competed before. Quite often what happens is they can reduce the amount of their workforce because they can make more efficient these processes. But it's a double-edged sword because they're in a situation where if you don't have a policy in place as to how you use generative AI, it could be more risky, more damaging than positive. And so more and more companies are starting to think about, how do I put generative AI but maintain control? They're looking for ways to create a lean workforce. Not to reduce or eliminate the workforce, but to create a lean workforce. Because of AI, they actually have opportunities to create competitive advantage even though they are smaller than their competitors. But they have to do it in a very informed and smart way. And for them, the cost of these technologies very closely related to where they get their funding. But let's move on to quantum. So in these same companies of these same sizes, they're looking for, okay, Brian, you've convinced me that there's something to this and I need to start thinking about quantum, but when and what to prioritize, and I'm sure you've all had the same conversations, is this really 5 or 10 years away? And so they want to know, when do I need to start thinking about this and what areas am I prioritizing? A little later in the conversation, I'm going to be talking about Y2Q and Q-Day, and is that going to be the trigger? Is that going to be the element that really gets people thinking about it, or is it something else? And free or low-cost training. So they're at the point today where they're really thinking about, does quantum really make sense to me? When I first started down this journey about 5 years ago, I learned about quantum from YouTube, and it was a great way to do it. But there are opportunities for low-cost training as well. One of the things I really like about D-Wave is that they have essentially a full suite of offerings for their clients. So when you think about the technology stack, that's one thing, but really starting to get understanding quantum and the ecosystem that goes around it. From a corporate perspective, it was a very interesting time about a year ago. I was asked to speak to a large aviation engineering firm, largely engineers, but before they allowed me to speak, they interviewed me 3 times. And the reason why they did that was because they wanted to make sure that whatever speech I had, it was going to be practical. And what had happened before that was that they had a number of quantum speakers. But when the quantum speakers would arrive at their premises and do their sessions, they'd tell them about all the things that quantum couldn't do today. So they were very hesitant about bringing in somebody to talk about quantum technologies. So obviously, one of the opportunities was to talk about D-Wave. We talked about their Port of Los Angeles activities. But also other examples from other vendors. One of the things that I look at when I talk about AI, for example, there was, well, let's say an opportunity for an agricultural satellite analysis firm to become more competitive. They had a solution that allowed them to collect satellite imagery on a 100 by 100 meter basis to determine soil value and crop strength and so on. And they would get this data every 2 days. They thought their solution was reasonable, but when we started talking about, okay, how can you get better data on a more regular basis. So one of the things we started talking about was ground-based systems. So how could you leverage a ground-based system, maybe that's using drone technology with sensors to get the same sort of data or better data? Well, as it migrated that conversation, we actually started talking about quantum sensors. And there are companies that are building those quantum sensors today, market available, that we could potentially attach to a drone. So we created a project. So in terms of all these roadmap priorities, they're looking at things that are going to move their business ahead, but there are lots of things that they aren't looking at, and we'll talk about those. First of all, Consortium Trends. We're seeing this international cooperation. The International Council of Quantum Industry Associations, recently set up in 2023. Companies are looking for centers of excellence. They're looking for people that they can trust. They're looking for lots of information about organization or about quantum capabilities in ways that are comfortable to them. This group made up of the QEDC, QUIC, Quantum Industry Canada, QStar from Japan. They've started aggressively getting together and talking about how they can work together to better offer various solutions, whether it's training, education, or marketplaces. If you've ever attended a QEDC marketplace, the number of vendors giving their promotions about their company, you learn so much about 5 or 6 different vendors' capabilities in the span of an hour. And this is all available to companies who are thinking about those various opportunities, or whether it's sensing, communication, or computing. So I always recommend that companies are starting to look at these industry associations. They may join, they may not, but it's access to a lot of information all at once. The institute that I started about 3 years ago, again, was intended to accelerate the adoption of quantum computing and quantum sensing and quantum communication technologies. So recently we've done a number of full reports that are accessible via our website. For example, how Europe prepares itself against quantum attacks, which is very interesting because not every country's strategy is the same. How Asian countries are preparing for post-quantum cryptography, and then a report on overall cryptography. But these are written in terms that CTOs and CIOs would understand to make them more accessible. What about those government trends? In the last year, the United States government added quantum technologies to the critical and emerging technology list. So I know Allison is here. She can answer all sorts of questions about where the US government is on this activity. And we're certainly seeing more interest because it is posted within this grouping. Anybody who is a corporate, anybody who has government ties, is looking at this critical and emerging technology list. Between the US government and NIST, whether it's PQC or QKD or some other sort of crypto encryption technology, the US government has now mandated that each of its governmental units are prepared for a post-quantum cryptography world. So what does that say to the corporate environment? Surprisingly, it doesn't seem urgent to them. They aren't watching what's happening from the government perspective, not to any great extent. If you talk to a CTO or a CIO and you ask them, what is quantum? It's kind of like back in 2015 when you asked, what is AI? They're really not understanding what quantum technologies are all about. We've got a ways to go, but the government is leading in certain ways. National quantum strategies. What we've seen is a proliferation of national quantum strategies, whether that's investments or education or some sort of consortium or collectives. Not every country has a quantum strategy yet, which may be surprising in 2024. What about metrics trends? Are qubits the primary metric going forward? It may be of interest to the industry, but it is of little interest to the buyer. Very little interest compared to other metrics. IBM recently decided to go towards operational gates in terms of a metric. It's an interesting change. Certainly, one of the things that D-Wave has done over the last 20-odd years is focused on the practical side of quantum technologies and talking about use cases. We certainly heard from companies like Pattison Group and Davidson and so on at this conference. They're looking for their own use cases. How can they actually leverage quantum technologies? And the difference is they're not looking for the home run. They're looking for incremental, iterative benefit over their classical systems at a reasonable risk, at a reasonable cost. So all of those sort of typical dashboard metrics. When we talk about where existing security layers are today, there are several in most companies, firewalls of different levels. So you start adding on PQC, QKD, one-time pad. It can increase your security, but it also increases the cost. So they're looking at what number of security layers is reasonable and over what time. For most of the people who are in this room have probably gone through the digital revolution. So if you were doing a transformation in your company, it probably took anywhere from 2 to 10 years. So if that's the case, what's the quantum transformation period for a company? Is it 2 to 10 years? What if the last bullet happens before 10 years from now and they're on a scramble to do it? So whenever I'm working with clients on roadmap capabilities, we start talking about just get started today. I think it was Scott yesterday talked about get help and get started. So 2 good pieces of advice for organizations to actually start thinking about how they get started. They don't even have to invest $1 today or whatever currency is relevant. They don't have to do that. They can start with a champion inside their organization who starts aligning some of their business goals to the possibilities of quantum. But they need to get started today. Last February 2024, I was at a Vancouver International Privacy and Security Summit, and we were thrilled to be there. All sorts of, I think there was about 750 people who attended. Cybersecurity very much a focus, privacy very much a focus. We were the only group talking about quantum. And to me in 2024, that was a bit of a surprise. But one of the people who was there was the Chief Technology Officer of NATO. And he said during his session that it was 2 to 5 years, maximum. So maybe you believe that, maybe you don't. But there is an urgency that's attached to at least preparing for that. And so when you're talking to your potential clients, there are opportunities to, whether it's you have a solution or you have a problem today that you need to solve, or that in some time in the future you need to solve, they need to start right away. I think there's one countdown clock for April 14th, 2030. It being June 2024, that's only 6 years away. So it'll be interesting to see when that arrives, but we certainly hear about the threats of, steal now, decrypt later. And we talk about that with our clients to make sure that they're starting to talk about how they start creating that quantum protection. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. One of the other metrics that we've started to talk about is quantum performance. And there were some definitions up there yesterday. You know, solving a useful problem that successfully addresses all of the traditional dashboard metrics for a business. So time, scope, budget, risk, branding, all of those things. Does the solution address all of those dashboard metrics? That's what they're looking for. I certainly understand that quantum supremacy and quantum advantage are important metrics at this era of quantum in order to identify the improvements over a single pillar. But when I talk to clients about supremacy, they believe it's universal. It's a quantum computer is better than a classical computer in every possible way. So using the term quantum performance has been somewhat more of a better talking point for us. When we talk about ways to connect with our clients and those in the global quantum community, we're trying to find terms that make sense to them. One of those is something I borrowed from a cybersecurity company, fight quantum with quantum. To a lot of our clients, they're saying, that makes sense to me. You're saying there's a threat. You're saying there's a possible piece of protection for me and my company. So fighting quantum with quantum. The next one is something we talk about every day. When I talk to business development people in the quantum industry, they find it's very difficult to get to either that meeting, that revenue stage. And so what clients are really looking for is a way to solve their problem. That could be AI, it could be quantum, it could be some other technology. But creating that relationship is a first point. When they start using the term quantum, they really have to know their clients, because that can be an exciting conversation, or it can be a very difficult conversation when it starts getting too complex. What about roadmaps? Sure, when I do an assessment with my clients, usually it's an accelerated roadmap process. Within a period of about 6 weeks, they have a 3-year roadmap. And that includes a competitive landscape, it includes a technical assessment, it includes their business problem assessment. But what we're trying to get to is a way that they can save themselves at least a year of learning by trial and error through a roadmap that's going to be very customized to that company. And so when they're ready to create this roadmap, they're also in a position where they've thought about it in their priority list. Are they really focusing on Gen AI today? Okay, well, in 6 months, they're going to start setting up a project for a quantum solution. The importance of hybrid. We talk about this with all of our clients. We say, it's so important for you to recognize that quantum is not the universal solution. Classical systems are critical. All the money that you spent on your infrastructure has all been worth it. And here are the opportunities for hybrid sitting side by side. But at the same time, they want to know that those systems can be integrated in a reasonable way, whether it's real-time data transmission back and forth or some other sort of mechanism. They want to know that there's that integration opportunity without risk. And then where are the centers of excellence? I've named a few in terms of the consortiums. Certainly you are in a position where you can learn more and more from a company like D-Wave, who provide courses. Certainly Quantum Strategy Institute provides access to common language information around quantum. It is an incredibly interesting time to be in quantum. I'm a 25-year banker who got curious about technologies and moved into this space, but I always bring that What's the ROI of this investment? What's the practical uses of this? So how can we get people to think about, here's an opportunity for me to invest from my company to get competitive advantage. So I'm always looking for ways to connect with the quantum community. And one of certainly the ways that I do that is through my Substack. I like to write about pretty much every varied topic on quantum technologies, whether it's mathematical formulas or simply a strategy that companies can use to successfully adopt those. I'm also involved with the Quantum Strategy Institute. In Canada, I work with a regional innovation center called the Innovation Factory. And the Innovation Factory works with the provincial governments and federal governments to provide assistance in marketing, in finance, in funding, getting access to funding. And those regional innovation centers have been very successful in getting startups and scale-ups to a point where they are moving readily into their competitive environment. About 4 years ago, the CEO of that Innovation Factory asked me to be their AI advisor because they were starting to hear more about it. I am regularly asked to help companies, whether it's just on an introductory basis or creating a network for them or doing a full roadmap. And those are happening consistently. In terms of quantum, it's just beginning. We may have done half a dozen roadmaps so far for companies, but it is very much just beginning. And I'm sure there are lots of other organizations, lots of the Deloittes and PwCs and Accentures and so on, who are working with organizations to help them create those roadmaps. So there are lots of different sort of centers of excellence, if you will. One of the ways that I try to connect with readers at all levels, I guess, is through books. And I never thought I would become an author, certainly not from a banking background. But when I wrote Quantum Boost, which was the foundational book on the top left, the reaction I got was incredible because people were saying, you're putting it in a language that I can actually understand. It's non-technical, it's not an archive paper. It's simply a way to start thinking about quantum technologies. My next book was around, well, there was a reason why I wrote the next book, because people were saying, well, come on, Brian, this is interesting, but there are no practical examples of how it's being used. So I wrote a book about 50 leading companies who were deploying quantum in some way, shape, or form. The next book was a labor of love. You know, there are so many different giants in the quantum world. And I'm not talking about necessarily, you know, the Einsteins and Feynmans. They've been well written about. But we chose other lesser known people to tell the story of what their contribution to quantum was. And we made sure it covered countries all around the world, Indonesia and Japan, South America, and so on. And so just another way for people to sort of identify with the contributors. We told their personal stories as well. On the bottom right, just this past year, a lot of you will know the company Curica, which not only provides training courses, but also provides that report that you've seen probably many times that identifies the level of investment that each country is making in their quantum community. And they just updated that report in June. So please go take a look. In terms of a course, what I wanted to do was give people the opportunity to learn about quantum strategy for themselves in a very, very convenient way. You can get a free sample of it if you go to Curica. Today I get to announce that I am writing what is now my 8th book, Quantum Strategy in 2025. You can be sure that this conference will be in that book because it was so compelling. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to the opportunity to write about all the new nuances in quantum computing and quantum sensing and quantum technologies. And certainly I want to thank D-Wave for the opportunity to speak to you today about where quantum is from a consumer or organizational decision maker's perspective. Thank you so much for your time today.